The easiest way to reveal a person's character is to give them someone they believe they can look down on. The words would not be spoken until much later, but on that unforgettable evening they were already becoming true beneath the dazzling crystal chandeliers of the Grand Crescent Hotel. Every corner of the magnificent ballroom shimmered with elegance. Golden light reflected across polished marble floors, a string quartet performed timeless classics, and servers moved gracefully between tables covered with white linen, fresh orchids, and sparkling crystal glasses. It was the annual Sterling Holdings Gala, an invitation-only celebration attended by governors, celebrities, investors, and some of the most influential business leaders in America. Every guest believed they had arrived to witness another glorious chapter in the Sterling family's legacy. No one realized they were about to witness its greatest turning point instead. Jonathan Sterling, the white billionaire chief executive officer of Sterling Holdings, stood confidently near the center of the ballroom wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. His smile appeared effortless as photographers surrounded him, capturing image after image of a man widely admired for transforming a family business into a multi-billion-dollar empire. Standing beside him, his wife Victoria welcomed distinguished guests with flawless manners and quiet confidence, while their son Ethan entertained a group of young entrepreneurs with stories about luxury cars, private aviation, and ambitious investments. Their daughter Olivia greeted reporters with polished charm, completing the picture of a family that seemed to have everything money could buy. Moving quietly through the celebration was Naomi Carter, a 29-year-old black waitress wearing a spotless white shirt, a neatly pressed black apron, polished black shoes, and a silver name tag that reflected the warm ballroom lights every time she passed beneath another chandelier. She carried a serving tray with steady hands, greeting every guest with genuine kindness regardless of whether they acknowledged her presence. Most people barely noticed her. To the wealthy crowd, she was simply another member of the hotel staff whose job was to make luxury appear effortless. Yet there was something different about the way she carried herself. Her posture remained calm. Her movements were measured. Her eyes quietly observed every detail without appearing curious. She never hurried, never hesitated, and never allowed the pressure of the evening to disturb her composure. A young coworker whispered, "How do you stay so calm when this place feels so overwhelming?" Naomi answered with a gentle smile. "Every room tells a story. I just try to listen before anyone else does." Before the young server could ask another question, Victoria Sterling raised her hand, signaling for service. Naomi approached with professional courtesy and carefully placed fresh coffee beside the family. As she reached across the table, Ethan casually nudged a folded linen napkin from the edge of the table onto the polished floor. The gesture was subtle enough to appear accidental, but the smile that followed suggested otherwise. Naomi immediately bent down to retrieve it. Before she could stand, Victoria looked directly at her and spoke loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Take your time. After all, that is what people in your position are here for." Several guests exchanged awkward smiles. A few laughed quietly. Others pretended not to notice. Jonathan did not interrupt. He simply adjusted his cuff links while continuing another conversation as though nothing unusual had happened. Naomi slowly picked up the napkin, folded it neatly, placed it back onto her tray, and answered with nothing more than a polite smile. She offered no argument, no complaint, and no visible frustration. That silence lingered far longer than any sharp reply ever could. Across the ballroom, an elegantly dressed attorney entered through a private hallway carrying a slim leather portfolio. He briefly looked toward Naomi before disappearing upstairs without attracting attention. Naomi glanced almost imperceptibly at the elegant watch on her wrist, then returned to serving the next table with the same quiet dignity. Around her, laughter resumed, champagne glasses touched, and the celebration continued exactly as planned. No one in the ballroom understood that the countdown toward an extraordinary revelation had already begun. Naomi Carter quietly continued across the ballroom as though the uncomfortable exchange had never happened. Her polished black apron remained perfectly straight, her serving tray stayed balanced, and her warm smile never faded, yet the silence she carried with her lingered far longer than Victoria Sterling's words. Several guests glanced in her direction before quickly returning to their conversations, uncomfortable with what they had witnessed but unwilling to challenge one of the most influential families in the country. The orchestra smoothly transitioned into another elegant melody, and within moments the room appeared normal again, at least on the surface. Naomi approached another table where an elderly couple thanked her sincerely for refilling their coffee cups. She smiled with genuine warmth and wished them an enjoyable evening before quietly moving on to the next group of guests. Unlike many people surrounding her, she never treated kindness as something reserved for the powerful. Every guest received the same patience, the same professionalism, and the same quiet respect. One of the hotel's senior banquet managers observed her from across the ballroom with thoughtful eyes. He had supervised hundreds of luxury events during his career and had learned to recognize grace under pressure. Most employees would have requested a break after being embarrassed in front of so many influential people. Naomi simply continued doing her job with steady confidence, never allowing her emotions to become part of the evening's entertainment. "Are you certain you do not need a few minutes?" the manager quietly asked when she passed nearby. Naomi answered with a calm smile. "Thank you, but every guest deserves the same level of service. I can rest after the evening is finished." The manager nodded respectfully. Something about her answer stayed with him. It sounded less like determination and more like someone patiently waiting for the proper moment to arrive. Across the ballroom, Jonathan Sterling accepted congratulations from business leaders who praised another year of extraordinary growth. Investors eagerly discussed future acquisitions while reporters prepared questions for his closing remarks. Every conversation reinforced the image of Sterling Holdings as an unstoppable American success story. Yet only a few feet away, Michael Brooks, the company's chief financial officer, checked his phone for what seemed like the fifth time in only a few minutes. Each notification deepened the thoughtful expression on his face. He quickly locked the screen whenever someone approached, but Jonathan noticed the unusual behavior. "Everything under control?" Jonathan asked with quiet confidence. Michael forced a polite smile. "Just routine updates. Nothing that should interrupt tonight." Jonathan accepted the answer without another thought. He had spent decades believing that every important development would reach him first. Across the room, Naomi gently placed a dessert plate before another guest before discreetly glancing toward the grand staircase leading to the hotel's private conference level. For only a brief second, her eyes met those of the attorney who had entered earlier. He offered the slightest nod before disappearing through a secured doorway. Naomi looked at the elegant watch on her wrist. The second hand continued its steady movement. She slipped her phone from the pocket beneath her apron just enough to read a single notification appearing on the locked screen. Preparation complete. Await final authorization. Without changing her expression, she returned the phone to her pocket and resumed serving another table. A young coworker noticed the message had made no visible difference. "You always seem so calm," she whispered. Naomi smiled gently before adjusting a water glass that had been placed slightly off-center. "Sometimes the biggest moments arrive quietly," she answered. "There is no reason to rush them." While laughter, music, and expensive champagne continued filling the magnificent ballroom, no one realized that somewhere above their heads, behind closed conference room doors, signatures were being prepared that would quietly rewrite the future of every person celebrating below. Jonathan Sterling stepped onto the small stage at the center of the ballroom as another round of applause rolled through the elegant hall. Behind him, a massive screen displayed the Sterling Holdings logo in brilliant gold, surrounded by photographs celebrating more than 80 years of corporate success. The audience rose to their feet almost automatically. Investors admired him. Reporters respected him. Young entrepreneurs dreamed of becoming him. To everyone watching, Jonathan Sterling represented the American promise that vision, discipline, and confidence could build an empire that would last for generations. He accepted the applause with practiced humility before raising one hand for silence. Tonight is not only a celebration of our company, he began. It is a celebration of every person who believed impossible goals could become reality. His voice carried smoothly across the ballroom, earning approving smiles from nearly every table. Naomi Carter continued serving coffee along the outer edge of the room while listening without appearing to pay attention. She carefully refilled empty cups, adjusted silverware that had shifted slightly out of place, and quietly thanked every guest who acknowledged her. To everyone else, she remained almost invisible. Yet from where she stood, she could observe everything. She noticed Jonathan speaking confidently about loyalty, opportunity, and the importance of treating people like family. She also noticed Michael Brooks checking another message beneath the table before immediately locking his phone again. Something was wrong, although Jonathan seemed completely unaware. Michael had spent years protecting the company from financial surprises, and tonight he looked less like a confident chief financial officer and more like someone waiting for news he could neither control nor prevent. Across the ballroom, Victoria Sterling proudly greeted donors while Ethan continued entertaining his circle of wealthy friends. They joked about business victories, expensive vacations, and future acquisitions as though the next decade had already been secured. Olivia smiled politely during interviews, repeating familiar phrases about the strength of the Sterling legacy. Their confidence appeared genuine, but beneath the polished surface tiny cracks had begun to appear. A respected investment banker quietly declined another invitation to join their table. Two institutional investors who had promised to attend the gala never arrived. One senior board member repeatedly excused himself to answer brief phone calls in the hallway before returning with a noticeably more serious expression. Most guests dismissed those moments as ordinary business interruptions. Naomi did not. She calmly collected another empty dessert plate before briefly glancing toward the grand staircase. Through the partially opened doors leading upstairs, she caught sight of several attorneys arranging leather portfolios around a polished conference table. One of them looked down toward the ballroom, recognized Naomi, and offered the smallest respectful nod before closing the door once again. Naomi returned the gesture almost imperceptibly and continued walking without changing her expression. A young reporter standing nearby quietly asked another journalist, "Have you noticed how many legal representatives are here tonight?" The older reporter shrugged. "Probably another acquisition. Sterling Holdings buys companies all the time." It sounded like a reasonable explanation, yet Michael Brooks happened to overhear the conversation. His face tightened for only a second before he forced another polite smile and returned to Jonathan's side. Jonathan finished his speech to another standing ovation. Crystal glasses rose into the air for a celebratory toast, and laughter quickly filled the ballroom once more. As everyone focused on the stage, Naomi slipped her phone from the pocket beneath her neatly pressed black apron for only a single heartbeat. A new notification illuminated the screen. Final approval received. Closing in 15 minutes. She gently locked the phone, placed it back into her pocket, and lifted another silver tray with the same calm confidence she had carried throughout the evening. Above the applause, beyond the music, and hidden behind carefully guarded conference room doors, the future of Sterling Holdings had already begun moving in a direction that no one celebrating below could possibly imagine. The celebration reached its brightest moment just as the invisible countdown quietly continued. Waiters carried elegant dessert plates through the ballroom, the orchestra shifted into another graceful performance, and guests filled the air with laughter that echoed beneath the towering crystal chandeliers. To everyone attending, the evening appeared flawless. Jonathan Sterling moved comfortably from one conversation to another, thanking investors for their confidence and promising an even stronger future for Sterling Holdings. His confidence seemed unshakable. After decades of success, he had learned to believe that every important decision happened because he approved it first. Across the ballroom, Naomi Carter carefully served coffee to another table before quietly replacing a misplaced dessert fork. Even after the humiliating remarks from the Sterling family earlier in the evening, she treated every guest with exactly the same patience and professionalism. Her calm presence almost disappeared into the elegance surrounding her, yet several hotel employees found themselves watching her with growing curiosity. It was not simply her composure. It was the unmistakable feeling that she knew something no one else in the ballroom understood. Near the entrance, Michael Brooks excused himself once again after his phone vibrated. He stepped into a quiet hallway and answered the call in a voice barely above a whisper. "Has everything been verified?" he asked. The answer on the other end lasted only a few seconds, yet every word seemed to drain the color from his face. "I understand," he replied quietly before ending the call. He remained perfectly still for several moments, staring at the dark screen in his hand. During the previous several months he had noticed unusual purchasing activity involving Sterling Holdings shares. Small investment firms had quietly acquired ownership percentages that seemed insignificant on their own. Certain long-term shareholders had unexpectedly sold portions of their holdings without attracting public attention. At the time, nothing appeared unusual enough to raise immediate concern. Now every isolated detail suddenly fit together with perfect clarity. Someone had been assembling control piece by piece with extraordinary patience. Michael slowly lifted his eyes toward the private conference level above the ballroom. Whatever was happening upstairs had already gone too far to stop. At nearly the same moment, the hotel general manager approached Naomi with respectful discretion. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, "the guests you were expecting have arrived." Naomi looked at him with calm appreciation. "Thank you. I will meet them shortly." The manager nodded without asking another question. Years in luxury hospitality had taught him that genuine confidence rarely announced itself. Naomi placed her serving tray onto a nearby service station, carefully straightened the black apron over her white shirt, and looked once toward the ballroom. Jonathan was laughing with business leaders. Victoria admired the floral arrangements while speaking with donors. Ethan continued telling stories that made his friends laugh. Olivia smiled for another photographer. None of them noticed Naomi quietly walking toward the grand staircase. As she reached the first step, she briefly checked the elegant watch on her wrist. Only 10 minutes remained. Upstairs, inside the private conference suite, several attorneys arranged neatly organized documents across a polished walnut table while financial advisors reviewed the final transaction summary. A leather portfolio bearing Sterling Holdings' corporate seal rested at the center of the table, waiting for the final procedural confirmation. Naomi entered the room with the same composed expression she had carried throughout the evening. Every attorney stood as she arrived, greeting her with quiet respect. Downstairs, champagne glasses continued to rise in celebration, unaware that only one floor above them, the future ownership of the company they were honoring had already entered its final moments before becoming official. The private conference suite overlooked the glowing ballroom through floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a remarkable contrast between two entirely different worlds separated by only a single floor. Below, elegant music continued flowing through the celebration while crystal glasses reflected warm golden light across hundreds of smiling faces. Above, silence filled the conference room as experienced attorneys, senior financial advisors, and representatives from a respected New York investment firm carefully reviewed the final transaction documents spread across a polished walnut table. Naomi Carter entered quietly, still wearing the same neatly pressed white shirt, black apron, silver name tag, and polished shoes she had worn while serving dinner only minutes earlier. Nothing about her appearance suggested that history was about to change. The lead attorney greeted her with genuine respect. "Good evening, Miss Carter. Every required approval has now been completed. We are ready for the final confirmation." Naomi thanked him politely before taking a seat at the end of the conference table. She reviewed each page with patient attention, occasionally asking brief questions that reflected a deep understanding of the transaction. The financial advisors answered with complete confidence. Every regulatory filing had been accepted. Every contractual obligation had been satisfied. Every shareholder agreement had been executed according to federal and state corporate law. There were no remaining obstacles. One attorney carefully turned the final document toward Naomi. Once this acknowledgement is completed, the ownership transfer becomes fully effective. Naomi read the final page from beginning to end without rushing. She had spent years preparing for this moment, yet there was no excitement on her face, only quiet focus. She signed her name with one smooth motion, placed the pen beside the document, and looked toward the lead attorney. He immediately verified the signatures before smiling warmly. "Congratulations, Miss Carter. As of this moment, you are the controlling owner of Sterling Holdings." No applause followed. No dramatic celebration interrupted the room. Instead, every professional around the table simply stood and shook her hand with sincere respect. Naomi thanked each of them individually before closing the leather portfolio. "One more request," she said calmly. "I would like the official announcement to be made downstairs tonight." One attorney looked slightly surprised. "Most clients prefer a private board meeting tomorrow morning." Naomi smiled gently. "The truth deserves to arrive while everyone is still together." The attorney nodded. "Very well. We will proceed according to your instructions." Downstairs, Jonathan Sterling laughed comfortably while accepting another congratulatory handshake from a longtime business partner. Investors continued discussing expansion opportunities, unaware that ownership of the company had quietly changed only moments earlier. Michael Brooks remained near the ballroom entrance, his growing concern impossible to hide. He glanced toward the grand staircase once again before receiving another secure message on his phone. This time he opened it immediately. The short confirmation contained only a few words, yet they answered every question that had troubled him throughout the evening. Transaction officially closed. He slowly lowered the phone and closed his eyes for a brief moment. Everything now made sense. The careful purchases of company shares. The confidential legal meetings. The unusual investment activity that had seemed unrelated for months. Every piece had belonged to a single carefully planned strategy. Upstairs, Naomi removed the black apron she had proudly worn throughout the evening, folded it neatly across the back of her chair, then gently placed her silver name tag inside the pocket before putting on a tailored black business jacket that had been waiting inside a garment bag. She looked exactly like the leader she had quietly become, yet her expression remained unchanged. She thanked the attorneys once more and walked toward the conference room door. As she stepped into the hallway, the elevator doors opened at precisely the same moment. The lead attorney stood beside her holding the completed portfolio. Together they began descending toward the ballroom where an entire room full of powerful people was still celebrating a future that no longer belonged to them. The elevator doors opened almost silently onto the ballroom level, and within seconds the quiet rhythm of celebration began to change. Naomi Carter stepped forward beside the lead attorney, now wearing a perfectly tailored black business jacket over her white blouse while her neatly folded black apron and silver name tag remained tucked safely inside her portfolio. Nothing about her expression suggested triumph. She walked with the same measured confidence she had shown while serving coffee only minutes earlier. Guests gradually noticed the unexpected group crossing the marble floor. Conversations faded one table at a time until even the orchestra slowed to an uncertain finish. Jonathan Sterling looked toward the entrance, surprised to see several senior attorneys and investment advisors approaching him together. Michael Brooks immediately understood what was about to happen. He quietly closed his eyes for a brief second before stepping beside Jonathan. "There is something you need to hear," he said softly. Jonathan frowned but remained composed. What could possibly be so important that it cannot wait until tomorrow morning? Before Michael could answer, the lead attorney stopped only a few feet away and offered a respectful nod. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for your time. I apologize for interrupting the celebration, but corporate law requires that formal notice be delivered immediately following the completion of tonight's transaction." Curious whispers spread across the ballroom. Television cameras slowly turned away from the stage and toward the unexpected gathering. Reporters instinctively raised microphones while photographers adjusted their lenses. Jonathan remained calm. Very well, he replied. Please continue. The attorney opened the leather portfolio and removed a carefully prepared document bearing the official corporate seal. Effective at 9:14 this evening, the controlling ownership interest of Sterling Holdings has been legally transferred following the successful completion of all regulatory approvals, shareholder agreements, and closing procedures. Jonathan's confident smile faded slightly. Transferred to whom? The attorney looked toward Naomi before speaking with complete clarity. The new controlling owner of Sterling Holdings is Miss Naomi Carter. For one extraordinary moment, the ballroom became completely silent. Crystal glasses remained suspended in midair. Conversations disappeared. Even the photographers hesitated before pressing another shutter. Ethan Sterling stared across the room in disbelief, unable to reconcile the announcement with the woman he had casually dismissed earlier that evening. Victoria slowly looked from the attorney to Naomi, remembering every word she had spoken during dinner. Olivia lowered her camera-ready smile as confusion gave way to quiet realization. Jonathan never took his eyes off Naomi. Years of negotiation had taught him to recognize deception, yet he saw none. She stood calmly before him without arrogance, without satisfaction, and without any desire to embarrass him. Michael Brooks accepted the legal documents from the attorney, carefully reviewed every page, and slowly nodded. The documentation is complete, he said honestly. The transaction is valid. The words settled heavily across the ballroom. Naomi stepped forward only after the silence had fully arrived. She folded her hands comfortably in front of her and spoke with the same gentle voice that had greeted guests throughout the evening. I asked for this announcement to happen here because everyone deserves to hear the truth at the same time. No anger appeared in her words. No accusation. Only calm certainty. Jonathan finally spoke, his voice quieter than it had been all evening. You knew this would happen while you were serving dinner. Naomi met his eyes respectfully. Yes. Then why did you continue working? Jonathan asked. Naomi answered without hesitation. Because I accepted a responsibility before I accepted ownership, and I believe a promise should be honored. Those simple words carried through the ballroom with remarkable clarity. In that unforgettable moment, the guests no longer saw a waitress standing before a billionaire. They saw a leader whose character had spoken long before her title ever did. No one spoke. The silence that settled across the Grand Crescent Hotel ballroom felt heavier than every round of applause that had filled the evening before. Guests who had spent the last several hours celebrating the Sterling family now found themselves looking toward Naomi Carter with entirely different eyes. Some appeared confused. Others seemed impressed. Many simply struggled to understand how the quiet woman who had served their coffee only minutes earlier could now stand before them as the controlling owner of one of the country's most respected companies. Jonathan Sterling remained motionless for several long seconds, studying Naomi with the calm concentration that had carried him through countless negotiations during his career. Yet this was different. For the first time in decades, he was facing a situation that neither wealth nor experience had prepared him to control. Michael Brooks quietly handed him the legal documents. Jonathan carefully reviewed the signatures, the shareholder approvals, and the final closing certification. Every page confirmed the same undeniable reality. He slowly closed the portfolio before lifting his eyes toward Naomi once again. Everything was completed legally, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Michael answered with complete honesty. Every requirement was satisfied. The transaction is final. Around the ballroom, several board members exchanged uncertain glances before instinctively stepping closer to Naomi instead of Jonathan. It was not an act of disloyalty. It was the natural recognition of where responsibility now rested. Reporters quickly resumed taking photographs, but this time their cameras focused on Naomi rather than the Sterling family. Ethan Sterling looked around the room in disbelief as he realized the attention had shifted completely. Earlier that evening he had laughed when Naomi quietly picked up the folded napkin from the floor. Now he found himself unable to meet her eyes. Victoria Sterling remembered every dismissive word she had spoken at the dinner table. Each sentence echoed in her mind with increasing weight. Olivia lowered the camera she had been using for photographs and simply watched Naomi with thoughtful silence. Jonathan finally stepped forward. His voice no longer carried the effortless certainty of the executive who had opened the evening celebration. Instead, it reflected genuine curiosity. "There is something I need to understand," he said respectfully. "If you had already spent years building this opportunity, why continue working here tonight?" Naomi answered without hesitation. "Because ownership does not define character. Choices do." She allowed those words to settle before continuing. "I accepted this shift several weeks ago. Completing it mattered to me because the people who work every day inside this hotel deserve the same respect as everyone attending this gala. A promise does not become less important simply because circumstances change." Several hotel employees quietly lowered their heads, deeply moved by what they had just heard. Naomi looked around the ballroom before speaking again. "During the past 3 years I never wanted my name to become the story. I wanted my actions to become the reason I earned this responsibility. Every investment was made openly through lawful agreements. Every decision followed the same rules available to every investor willing to be patient." Jonathan listened carefully without interrupting. He recognized discipline when he saw it. The remarkable achievement standing before him had not been created overnight. It had been built through planning, restraint, and determination that no public recognition had ever encouraged. The ballroom remained completely still. No one applauded. No one whispered. Every person present seemed to understand that they were witnessing something much greater than a corporate acquisition. They were witnessing the quiet reversal of assumptions that had governed the entire evening. Without raising her voice or showing the slightest trace of resentment, Naomi had accomplished something extraordinary. She had transformed the conversation from ownership to integrity, and in that unforgettable moment, the value of genuine character became impossible for anyone in the room to ignore. The atmosphere inside the ballroom gradually shifted from disbelief to quiet reflection as the reality of the evening settled over every guest. Crystal chandeliers continued casting warm light across the polished marble floor. Yet the room no longer felt like a celebration of wealth alone. It had become a place where assumptions were quietly falling apart. Jonathan Sterling remained standing only a few feet from Naomi Carter, holding the legal portfolio that confirmed the transaction beyond any doubt. For the first time in many years, he appeared less concerned with protecting his reputation than with understanding the woman standing before him. He slowly returned the documents to the lead attorney before speaking again. "Miss Carter," he said respectfully, "I have spent decades believing leadership was earned through results. Tonight you have reminded me that results alone are not enough." Naomi listened without interrupting. She understood that moments of genuine reflection should never be rushed. Jonathan continued, "Earlier this evening my family failed to treat you with the dignity every person deserves. That responsibility belongs to us, and I regret that it happened under my watch." The ballroom remained completely silent. Victoria Sterling stepped forward beside her husband, no longer hiding behind polished confidence. "I judged your uniform before I ever considered your character," she admitted quietly. "That was unfair, and I sincerely apologize." Ethan lowered his eyes before speaking in a voice far different from the one he had used while laughing with friends only an hour earlier. "I thought success made people important. Tonight I realized character does." Olivia offered a small, thoughtful smile toward Naomi. "Thank you for responding with grace instead of anger." Naomi accepted every word with calm humility. She did not allow the apologies to become uncomfortable, nor did she attempt to make anyone feel smaller than they already did. "Respect is most meaningful when it changes tomorrow," she replied gently. "None of us can rewrite what happened earlier this evening. We can only decide what happens next." One of the senior board members finally stepped forward. "As the controlling owner, what will be your first executive decision?" Every reporter immediately lifted a microphone once again. Television cameras focused on Naomi, expecting dramatic announcements, executive dismissals, or sweeping changes. Instead, she smiled with quiet confidence. "No one will lose a position tonight," she answered. A wave of surprise moved across the ballroom. Naomi continued, "Tomorrow morning every executive, every manager, every assistant, and every employee throughout Sterling Holdings will begin participating in a leadership initiative centered on professional respect, workplace dignity, and servant leadership. Titles may define responsibilities, but they should never define the value of a human being." Several hotel employees exchanged emotional glances. They had spent years making extraordinary evenings possible while remaining almost invisible to many guests. Hearing those words from the company's new owner carried a significance that no financial announcement could equal. Jonathan looked around the ballroom, observing the faces of employees he had passed countless times without truly seeing. He suddenly understood that a successful company was not measured only by quarterly reports or market value. It was also measured by the everyday experiences of the people whose quiet work allowed success to exist in the first place. Naomi turned toward the hotel staff and thanked them for their professionalism throughout the evening before expressing gratitude to the attorneys, financial advisors, and board members who had completed the transaction with integrity. No one applauded immediately. The room simply absorbed the weight of what had been said. In that remarkable silence, the greatest victory of the night no longer belonged to a corporate acquisition. It belonged to a simple truth that every person in the ballroom would remember long after the headlines disappeared. Genuine leadership begins by recognizing the dignity that already exists in every human being. The evening slowly drew to a close, but no one inside the Grand Crescent Hotel believed they had simply attended another corporate gala. Conversations became quieter as guests prepared to leave, each carrying away a very different memory from the one they had expected when they first arrived beneath the glittering crystal chandeliers. Reporters packed away their cameras while still exchanging astonished observations about the extraordinary announcement they had witnessed. Financial analysts discussed the historic acquisition that would undoubtedly dominate business headlines the following morning, yet many of them admitted that the transaction itself was only part of the story. The greater lesson had unfolded long before the legal documents were revealed. Jonathan Sterling remained near the center of the ballroom, watching Naomi Carter speak with board members, attorneys, hotel employees, and guests with exactly the same warmth and respect. Her voice never changed according to someone's title. Her attention never depended upon someone's wealth. She greeted every individual with equal sincerity, just as she had while carrying a serving tray earlier that evening. Jonathan quietly realized that genuine leadership was not something she had discovered after becoming the owner of the company. It was something she had possessed long before anyone recognized her authority. After most of the guests had departed, Jonathan approached Naomi one final time. The ballroom had become almost peaceful, with hotel staff carefully collecting centerpieces and folding linens while the orchestra packed away its instruments. "Miss Carter," Jonathan said with quiet sincerity, "I built a successful company, but tonight you reminded me that building a respected company requires something much greater." Naomi looked toward him with the same calm expression that had remained unchanged throughout the evening. "Every organization reflects the way it treats the people whose names rarely appear in annual reports," she replied gently. "Respect grows from ordinary moments long before it becomes part of a mission statement." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "If you will allow it, I would like to help build that future beside you rather than stand in its way." Naomi smiled warmly before extending her hand. "Then we begin tomorrow." Their handshake was not the conclusion of a rivalry. It was the beginning of a shared commitment to something better than pride. Nearby, Victoria, Ethan, and Olivia quietly thanked several hotel employees before leaving the ballroom, each choosing simple kindness instead of hurried indifference. The change was small, yet everyone who witnessed it understood its significance. Character rarely transforms through dramatic speeches. More often, it changes through quiet decisions repeated one person at a time. Before leaving, Naomi walked to the service station where she had spent much of the evening working. She reached into her portfolio, removed the neatly folded black apron and the silver name tag she had carefully preserved, and held them gently for a brief moment. She smiled softly before placing both items into a keepsake box the hotel manager offered her. "These belong to an important chapter," she said. "I never want to forget where this journey was lived." As she stepped outside, the cool night air welcomed a city glowing beneath thousands of lights. A waiting car stood quietly at the entrance, but Naomi paused for one final glance toward the hotel before getting inside. She had entered those doors as a waitress who believed every person deserved dignity. She left as the owner of a company carrying exactly the same belief. Wealth had changed. Titles had changed. Ownership had changed. Only her character remained exactly as it had always been. Long after the headlines faded and the celebration became a memory, the people who had filled that magnificent ballroom would remember one simple truth above everything else. The greatest measure of success is never the power to command respect. It is the wisdom to give respect freely before anyone believes they have earned it.